Hey everybody, how are you today? So today in class we're going to be finishing World War II. So we're going to finish going over this battles worksheet. I'll refer to the notes page a little bit for some information. We're going to discuss the test review sheet, which is due today. And we're going to play Kahoot to review for the test. And then sometime this week you can be taking the test. And then we're going to be preparing for our roundtable discussion about should the United States have dropped the atomic bomb on Japan to bring the war to a swift close. And so you guys at home should be reading the documents, completing the 5-on-5 paper where you're writing down 5 things you find interesting, 5 main points, kind of coming to your own conclusion about whether the US should have dropped the atomic bomb or not. And then kind of writing basically a little thesis. And then they're going to be having the roundtable discussion in class on Friday, which means that you guys need to, tape yourself like 30 seconds or so as far as reading some of your points and kind of discussing your opinion. And making sure that you're including documents in there and perhaps a quote if necessary, so your opinion is clear, so you can get that part of the grade. Because the other kids will each have to be sitting in a circle, they'll each have to talk, they'll be expected to respond to their classmates, to take notes, to formulate questions during the discussion. And then last but not least, there's reflection questions to answer, kind of what you learned, what you think about the future of nuclear warfare, the lasting impact of the atomic bomb, as it led us into a nuclear age post-World War II. And then that's officially due Monday, but the kids who are here in person, they really are doing part of it Thursday, having part of it due Friday, the rest of it due Monday. So make sure you're keeping on track with that so that you're on pace with them because they're doing all of this work each day. So we left off yesterday. My video kind of got cut off in the middle. That's okay. It was pretty long. We were talking about D-Day, right? And how this was, the grand plan to eventually take out Hitler and the Germans. The attack was planned for June 6, 1944. It was going to be led by General Eisenhower and General Patton with the help of other generals like Omar Bradley. And the goal was to convince Adolf Hitler that the attack was going to actually happen at, Calais and not at Normandy. And so if I look here at a map of France, let's see if I can find a good one. I noticed yesterday they didn't really have a good one for us to use in my PowerPoint notes. And that one doesn't really show us Calais either. Let's see, is that a better one? Maybe I'll hit pause for a second so I can find one. All right, so this is what I wanted to show you. So when we're thinking about France, remember, they wanted to convince Adolf Hitler that the attack was going to be happening here at Pas-de-Calais. So right across in England, basically at Dover, they had built this entire fake military base, right, with Operation Fortitude, with the blow-up tanks and sending secret messages, and then they would move the tanks and the blow-up trucks in the middle of the night, making it seem like they were going to launch an invasion from here. So Hitler, remember, had most of his troops that were in France stationed here around Calais. But in reality, the attack is going to be happening here at Normandy. And Hitler realized it was probably going to be happening at one of these two places, just based off geography and where would be a good place to kind of storm the beaches, the coastline, to really make that attack. And so it's honestly pretty impressive that they were able to fool Adolf Hitler as well as they were as part of this Operation Fortitude. But the real plan, remember, is called Operation Overlord. And this Operation Overlord is the largest land, air, sea operation in American history. It's us working with the British, the Canadians, all the Allied forces together in this attempt to, storm the beaches, bring in our troops, overwhelm France, retake Paris, get rid of this Vichy-occupied France, put someone like Charles de Gaulle back in power, and eventually push into Belgium, the other occupied territories, and eventually into Germany. Because remember, this is what they had agreed at the Tehran conference, that they were going to take out, free France, take out Hitler, and eventually then go after Japan. And the Russians were very clear that they were not going to be able to take out Hitler, or I should say help with France, but they were going to help take out Hitler. They both wanted to help do that and to divide Germany and kind of each occupy it and kind of get the revenge there. And then eventually they all claimed they were going to help with Russia, but of course that never really comes to pass. And then remember, they often called this D-Day. That was just kind of the code name, the term that was often being used by General Eisenhower's men. And then as the day of the invasion happens, you're going to be seeing that the vast majority of the American troops are coming in here at Omaha Beach, but we've also got, the Canadians, the British coming in there at Juneau, at Sword, at Gold, at the other breaches. But they really have the vast majority of the casualties there at Omaha Beach. Let's see if I've got here's another good kind of picture of you can see it. So Omaha was where most of the American casualties were happening, especially compared to like Sword or Juneau. So there were Germans who were there guarding it behind the barbed wire, kind of waiting in case there was an attack. They stopped many Americans from coming through. 2,500 Americans died there at Omaha Beach that day. It is considered the longest day, the hardest day ever. If you ever watch the movie Saving Private Ryan, I will warn you it's rated R. It's pretty graphic. They do show that invasion. And then, once Hitler finds out that, wait a minute, he thought the attack was coming at Calais. He does bring his troops over, but it's too little too late. Within a week, the Americans are able to really regain about 80 miles in France, eventually take back the country, and then push the Germans, kind of back into Belgium and then back into their own territory. Now, Hitler does attempt to make one last great offensive at the Battle of the Bulge. He's hoping to attack Belgium to cut off the Americans from their supplies. He does surround some of the Americans. General Patton and his troops are going to be sent in by General Eisenhower to save some of the Americans who've been encircled, cut off from supplies. And in lightning quick kind of speed, the Americans kind of help each other. Within 3 days they get there. They stop the men from being attacked and being surrounded. The Americans then push through the German line, which had kind of bulged outward, which is why they call it the Battle of the Bulge. And then they're able to further push the Germans, back into Belgium, back into their own territory. And then over the next couple of weeks into months, really between October of 44 and April of 45, they're able to push the Germans all the way back to Berlin. And during that last month especially, sorry guys, my allergies are just hideous. During the last month in particular, there is a real race to Berlin. The Russians are coming in from the east. The Americans are coming in from the west. The Americans are facing heavy casualties. Some Germans are surrendering, but many of them are in disbelief. They can't believe that their country is getting invaded. They've been bombed for some time, but it's a different thing to have troops in your hometown. They're fearful for their lives. Some of them are surrendering. Some of them are fighting against the Americans. It's chaos. The Americans are going to suffer about 75,000 casualties, the Germans about 100,000. As they are closing in on the location of Hitler and where they believe he is at least in his bunker, this is the point when Hitler is with Eva Braun, his mistress, and he has his artwork from his younger days, a picture of his mother, some documents, some journals, and Eva kills herself first. Maybe he kills her, that's not exactly clear. Then he kills himself. His men hear the shots. They were instructed that after Hitler was dead, they would burn the body, so that as the Americans, the Russians show up, and the Russians actually beat us there slightly, there's really nothing left of Hitler. It's just kind of a smoldering mess. And from this point on, Hitler's successor, is actually going to be a guy by the name of Donowitz. He is kind of officially in charge. He's going to be the one who says we can't hold out any longer. We need to just have an unconditional surrender, even though we were hoping to not surrender to the Russians, just to the Americans. It's an unconditional surrender. The war is over May 8th of 45, and we call this VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. And now Germany is going to be divided between American troops who are stationed in the west and Russian troops who are stationed in the east. And of course, the Nuremberg trials will go on to punish people who were high-ranking officials in the military and kind of responsible for the Holocaust, and those camps will be liberated. Now, as we move to the Pacific, okay, and now if we switch gears and we talk about what's happening in the Pacific to wrap up the war, we already talked a little bit earlier about the Battle of Guadalcanal and how that happens basically right after the Battle of Midway, which remember was the turning point in the Pacific, looking back in 1942. And we said that the Navajo code talkers played a key role in that. The Americans realized that since we could crack the Germans and the Japanese codes, they would be able to crack our version of the Enigma as well. So we needed an uncrackable code so they couldn't figure out where we were going to be sending troops or where we were going to be attacking or what our plans were. So we decided to use, remember, the Navajo language, since very few white people spoke it, and people could send messages very rapidly since it wouldn't require a coding machine. And so it helped us to really kind of effectively communicate. And so we're going to have this victory at Guadalcanal. And if I show you kind of a picture of a map here, you can see Guadalcanal. Oh, well, maybe not. Where is my map? I guess I'll use this one. Okay, so we'll use this map. And you can really see what's going on here is here's Guadalcanal, okay, it's down here right by the Solomon Islands. And the idea was, yet again, we're kind of just continuing on to try to force the Japanese to kind of lose the territory that they've once taken. So at this point, remember in red is really kind of all their empire. We really stopped them here at the bottom of Papua New Guinea from kind of getting that territory. That was what really the Battle of Coral Sea was about. And then we stopped them from getting Australia. And that battle kind of happened at the same time. Remember, that was an all-air battle. We stopped them as well at Midway. They were hoping to take Midway and then eventually to go after Pearl Harbor and who knows, California. Or just to destroy us, so that we couldn't try to retake the Philippines or anything. And, we stopped them at Midway so that they couldn't have that invasion. And so also kind of about at the same time as all this is going on, we're fighting this battle at Guadalcanal right here at the Solomon Islands just to try to retake some of this territory. And it's successful. Yet again, we're having huge casualties. And then over the next couple of years, between 43, 44, it's really going to be about island hopping. So we're interested in trying to take the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, and specifically the Mariana Islands. We do own Guam. And we're just trying to get closer to Japan because remember what our issue is that to fly from Pearl Harbor, even once they're rebuilding it, it's difficult to fly there and to get back. You're launching off of an aircraft carrier, and then if you're going to have the long-range bombers, if they're going to be trying to attack Japan directly to bomb them, it's not really feasible. You can only use certain planes, and then remember the B-25s can't land back on the aircraft carrier, which was the whole issue with the Doolittle raid. And we just need to really take over some islands which are closer to Japan. We're really interested specifically in getting like Iwo Jima. And this map in particular doesn't show Okinawa, which is right here. We're trying to get that as well because if you're going to launch an invasion into Japan, you need a controlled island. You need a safe space where you can bring in perhaps thousands, perhaps millions of American troops to eventually force the Japanese into submission. So we're going to slowly but surely start to island hop or basically go from one to the other to try to get strategic points. And of course, we want to retake the Philippines as well and to save those Americans because MacArthur promised to get them back. As we're going about it, kind of going through the Marshall Islands, the Gilbert Islands, the Mariana Islands, we see bloody battles, very, very bloody battles. Basically, the Japanese control these territories, and it's hard to really bring a boat right up to the shore. And so just like parking the boat kind of off into the water, it gets stuck on the reef. As the Americans have to wade through the water to get to the beach, many of them die. Only 1 in 3 Marines usually make it. Eventually, we get smarter and we start using Amtrak boats. So it's basically like the kind of boats that they use down in Florida, like with alligators, boats that kind of look more like tractors or tanks that can kind of have wheels on them, can go on land, like the duck boats, like at Wisconsin Dells, if you've ever been up there. And so those are possible that they can basically have them in the water and then basically drive them up onto the land and then have the troops unload. So they have a little bit more coverage. They're not as exposed as much. And so it helps it to keep them, a little bit safer, I guess. So we do start to see some victories. So we start to see some of these casualties, but heavy, start to see some victories, I should say, as we're retaking land, but heavy casualties in the process. We are eventually going to fight a major battle. And so I talked about Guadalcanal, but we are going to fight a major battle here at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And the Battle of Leyte Gulf is the largest naval battle in history. And it's really disastrous for Japan because in 3 days' time, they're going to lose 3 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, 500 planes. Leyte Gulf is, let me see if I can find a better map. It is on the side here of the Philippines, but it's not really labeled well in my notes. Let me see if I can. Do I have a better one? No, not really. No, not really. I don't really have a great map, unfortunately. But it's right here on the side of the Philippines is Leyte Gulf. And they're going to be coming in, and we're basically going to think that we destroy their boats and that we're good to go, and that we could just basically invade the island and retake it. But the Japanese surprise us. They come in from the other side. And this is when we start to see kamikaze pilots who are willing to be suicide bombers and just, dive bomb right into our planes, aircraft carriers. They're going to inflict some damage. They will die, but they will also destroy us in the process. And so it's a hard fight. It's the largest naval battle in history. And then eventually, we're successful. The Japanese believe that we're bringing in more boats and more men, so they basically retreat. And then we're eventually basically able to come aboard the island. There's not a ton of Japanese troops actually stationed here. The Filipinos are happy to see us, and so General MacArthur can make his big statement of, we have returned. And so, ultimately, we do return, and we're able to retake that island, and, we're in a better position to actually attack mainland Japan. Now, two of the other important battles are, okay, we're almost done here. So when it comes to the Battle of Iwo Jima is going to be yet again another critical battle for the United States. And this one, if you notice, we're now in 1945. And the war in Europe is still raging. But even when the war in Europe ends in April of 45, Germany is going to be done, but we're still fighting Japan. And we're going to be appealing to the British and the Russians for help. And they're going to be like, oh, well, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're sick, blah, blah, blah. So guess what? All those promises that all for one, one for all, oh, we all have a common enemy, you're supposed to help save us, they pretty much do squat to help us take out the Japanese and to end World War II. And so we really feel this pressure that it's on us. And our American casualties are still accumulating, and they're still fighting us, they're still killing us. So we are really still struggling at this point. We really feel like we're isolated on our own. But Iwo Jima is an important battle. And if I'll show you the map here, you'll kind of see why. So here's Iwo Jima, and we've already retaken the Mariana Islands. We retake the Philippine Islands after the Battle of Leyte Gulf. We need to take Iwo Jima next, and then there's little islands here of Okinawa, where some Japanese civilians live, and then we can go after the mainland of Japan and end this war. So when it comes to Iwo Jima, it's yet again just part of our island hopping campaign. We need to get there. It's critical. It's a great place for our planes to fly from. It's going to be, just right in the kind of our path. But as you can imagine, the Japanese have this island well defended. There are a few Japanese people who live there, but for the most part, they've brought in a ton of troops. We think it's going to be a great place, though, that we could, fly planes out of to attack Tokyo and to eventually do the invasion. And so, since the Japanese fight back ferociously, we face heavy losses, almost 7,000. The Japanese lose about 18,000. And, the Japanese, they, found every way possible to attack us. So a lot of them, in fact, were fighting in tunnels, and they had kind of, had lived in caves and whatnot. And so they basically used the element of surprise and guerrilla warfare tactics to attack us. And we see a lot more suicide bombers, the kamikazes. That means divine wind in Japanese. And they believe that it's part of their code of honor, or their bushido, to fight to the death, to do whatever it takes. But eventually we are able to kind of retake, some key, areas, especially Mount Suribachi. You can see the Americans putting up the flag there. That's one of the most famous monuments in Washington, D.C. to this day. It looks like the flag is actually going up, if you've ever seen the monument in person. And, it was a key vantage point, because then we could, kind of take the high ground, see what was down below, and then kind of work from there to, take over the rest of Iwo Jima. So yet again, difficult battle, as the Japanese are willing to fight to the death, but we eventually do take it. One of the most important battles, though, is the Battle of Okinawa. So this is really going to go in April and May and June of 1945. And as far as the Battle of Okinawa, just so you can kind of see how close we are to Japan at this point. So this is this little island here. And so we're pretty close to Japan. Here is Iwo Jima. And we realize that this is yet again, another good position, another island that we could use to kind of bring in troops as a staging point, and then eventually to attack Japan. The reason that this battle was so important is because Japanese people live here. And so the Japanese people fight to the death. Like, it's not just soldiers who are fighting us, it's Japanese people who are fighting us. And rather than get captured, they kill themselves. They jump off of buildings. And we're going to see huge casualties. That basically in the 2.5 months this battle goes on, we see that about 12,500 Americans are killed and over like 100,000, 110,000 Japanese are killed. Some of them die from infection, some of them die in battle, some of them die because they kill themselves. And so this starts to really kind of scare us. We start to really wonder, what would an invasion of actual Japan look like? These people are willing to fight to the death, tooth and nail. So if this is what we can expect from just the average Japanese person, fighting in Japan could go on for another 6 months or a year. We could see, hundreds of thousands, if not like a million casualties for the Japanese and for us. And that really scares us. And so we start to talk about, how can this war come to an end? FDR is dead at this point. Harry S. Truman, the vice president, is now in power. And we're talking about, what is next for America? How can we end this war, especially since the British and the Russians really aren't coming in to help? And Secretary of State Stimson and some of the other members of the president's cabinet, they have different ideas. Some of them say, tell the Japanese that they don't have to have an unconditional surrender, that they can leave the emperor in power. Some of them say, let's create a huge weapon, an atomic bomb of sorts, and force them to surrender. When it comes to talk of an atomic bomb, a weapon, there's talk of, well, maybe we should tell them we have it and threaten to use it unless they give us an unconditional surrender, or maybe we give them the out of keeping their emperor. Other people say, let's just threaten them and tell them, if they don't surrender unconditionally, the war will come to an end and they'll face a terrible consequence, but let's not tell them what it will be. Other people say, if we just put economic sanctions on them and take away their oil yet again, or continue to just bomb Tokyo, because those Tokyo bombings and fire raids are already kind of destroying the city and killing people. Let's just keep doing that. So there's a lot of debate going on about what is the best path for the future and how can we really kind of kill the will of the Japanese people to fight. But it seems like they're never going to give up, because they view the Americans as monsters for their propaganda, and they believe that dying for their country is, honorable. And so this battle in Okinawa is definitely difficult. It's the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater. And, it makes Americans very fearful of what it will be like to actually invade Japan itself, which is why, as we move into August, President Truman makes a very difficult decision, which, he doesn't think he'll regret, he doesn't think he'll worry about, but he feels like he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. He gives the Japanese a warning, which is that unless you unconditionally surrender and give up Emperor Hirohito in power and let us make you a democracy with military rule in place, because we don't trust you, you're going to face the ultimate punishment. We don't really tell them a whole lot what that is, though. We're not going to continue to firebomb them. And then, of course, we drop the atomic bombs. On August 6th, we drop the first atomic bomb, which is going to be on the city of Hiroshima. The Enola Gay drops the atomic bomb called Little Boy. It destroys about 70,000 people in this industrial city. On August 9th, the Boxcar drops the atomic bomb called Fat Man on Nagasaki. It's a city of about 40,000. And so the war comes to an end because people are dying, there's radiation poisoning, it's a disaster. This Manhattan Project, which was to create the bomb by Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein, was successful. They, of course, unconditionally surrender, but it leaves lasting casualties. It makes people worry about using atomic bombs in the future. And so now it's VJ Day, or Victory in Japan Day. And so there's going to be all sorts of trials putting many of these Japanese war criminals on trial. But World War II is over. There's going to be a United Nations, a peacekeeping group created, and a focus of what happens in the future. That's it for now. Later, guys.